You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 472 of the podcast. And in this one, I chat with Nick Sireau and Margherita Zenoni about their stories. Nick founded OCD Orchard, a not-for-profit for advancing global OCD research, and Margherita manages the communication and fundraising for OCD Orchard and is doing her PhD at the University of Cambridge. And in this episode, we discuss their OCD stories, their work at OCD Orchard, the research they have supported and are a part of, and much, much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. So thank you to Nick and Margherita. It was a real pleasure to chat with them, get to know them a bit better, and find out about all the good work they're doing at OCD Orchard, as well as hearing their stories. So thank you as always to you guys for listening. It means a lot. And without further ado, here is Nick and Margherita. Welcome to the podcast, Nick and Margherita.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Hi, Stuart.
Yeah, it's good to have you both on. And Nick, I'd spoke to you previously on a Zoom call we had a long time ago when I think early days of Orchard. And then I saw you both at your really good event or conference you ran last year now. I really enjoyed that. It was different to the other conferences I've been to. A lot of the talks and research that was presented was different that you might not see at a traditional OCD conference. So yeah, thank you for putting that on. I'm sure we can talk more about that in a bit, but initially it'd be good to hear, both your OCD stories. So I don't know, who wants to go first?
Margherita?
Okay, I'll go first. Well, I presented the first symptoms of OCD when I was 17. And when NEET arrived, I knew absolutely nothing about what OCD was. Although within 2-3 weeks, from experiencing the first symptoms, I obviously knew that there was something going wrong somewhere in my brain. Because I really felt like my brain had been hijacked, basically, by an external force, when instead it wasn't an external force, it was within my brain. So actually, that made it even scarier, if you want. And it was very difficult. Like for the first, I would say, 3-4 months or so, I didn't speak to anyone about that. Because, I thought, who could understand? I couldn't even kind of verbalize actually what was going on within my head. And then when I decided to speak about it, I've done it with, the people that were closest to me. But again, like there was a lot of, misunderstanding there. Like nobody had any idea, including obviously my parents, what I was talking about, really. So yeah, it was extremely difficult at the beginning. And then I was actually, now I know I've been actually among kind of the luckiest one, because I got help only, obviously in quotes, after 8 months since when I started developing the symptoms, because my father realized that there was definitely something wrong and that he couldn't explain to himself. So I started to see a psychotherapist. She was not specialized in treating OCD, so she helped until a certain point, actually, but not enough. So there were some aspects of the therapy that made my OCD worse. And I actually stayed with this therapist for about 3 years. So for the first 3 years, I really never improved. I don't know why the psychotherapist actually never suggested that I could need medication when I really needed medication. So yeah, it was like the last 3 years of high school, and as of now, they've been, I think, the worst 3 years of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And so this was in Italy, right?
Yeah, this was in Italy, exactly, like where I'm from, in Milan. I'm from Milan, exactly. And I attended high school there. So this was all happening in Italy. Yes.
Okay. And is that through, I'm not familiar with the health service there. Is that through like the equivalent of the NHS, or was it private that you sought help?
No, I actually, I saw this psychotherapist privately. Well, we have a public health system, but it usually takes, as here in the UK, actually through the NHS, several months to access a treatment, especially if it's mental health treatment. And honestly, I was already too ill to wait. It was about 1 year waiting list to see someone, and I couldn't wait that 1 year because I just couldn't function in my daily life. It was extremely difficult for me even to get out of bed and go to school, let alone paying attention to what, teachers were explaining in school. So I had a very kind of worsening of my grades and worsening of my social life. But again, it was extremely difficult because obviously none of my peers, none of my classmates knew what I was going through. And when I tried to explain it to someone, I was considered the weird one. Like I was considered weird.
Yeah.
So obviously that didn't encourage me, to open myself more about it. So yeah, I went privately. Like I just couldn't wait all the time.
Yeah, of course, of course. A year's a long time to wait when you're struggling, right? Yeah, and was it fairly effective for you pretty quickly when you found the right sort of intervention, or did it
Uh,
take time?
I would say it wasn't that effective. I mean, for sure, speaking to someone helped me. But if you think about the first 3 years of therapy, again, I wasn't under any medication because for some reason, the psychotherapist I was seeing kind of saw medication very kind of negatively. She didn't want to give them to me because I was only 17, when actually now I know you can give sertraline to a 6 or 7 year old. So looking backwards now, I feel like, my God, like honestly, I could have saved a good 2 years of my life that I wasted in a huge amount of suffering because of the OCD. But yeah, she didn't make me liaise with any psychiatrists, and she wasn't really trained to treat OCD properly. Plus, actually, if we want to say it all, because one of my OCD themes was religion, like religion-linked obsessions. And this therapist, she was extremely religious. She was very religious. So sometimes she would say sentences actually that would worsen my symptoms. So honestly, if I could go back and choose, what to do at 17-year-old, just I didn't have the knowledge to choose wisely back then, I would definitely choose another person, like another professional, someone who's actually trained in treating OCD.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That would
And
be much better.
yeah, of course, of course. But we don't know what we don't know, right? And it takes
Yeah.
time for us to sort of find our way through. But how are you doing now, would you say?
Oh, much better. I mean, if I think about my 17, 18, 19 years old, uh, I mean, back then I could have never imagined to be doing what I'm doing today. I'm in such a much better place. I had two severe relapses over the years, but when I had them, I was also in a much better place in terms of knowledge. Um, and the people surrounding me, like obviously then when I started studying psychology back in Milan, actually I studied in an Austrian university, so it was partially in Milan, partially based in Vienna. Then but I mean at that point I was surrounded by people that would understand much more about what I was going through. And then I done my master's at UCL in London, and it was in the Department of Psychiatry. And that was when I had my first severe relapse. And by then I already had like much more knowledge about the condition. And all the people surrounding me, obviously, you know, they knew how to help me best, basically. So it was a very, very bad period of my life again. But the support I received, pharmaceutically and therapeutically speaking, was very, very effective for me.
Good. Yeah, brilliant. And I was going to say, well, I didn't get you guys to introduce yourselves at the start, but obviously you're at Cambridge now. Maybe just talk about that and maybe the work you do at
sure.
Orchard OCD.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm doing my PhD at Cambridge University. And by the way, my second severe relapse was just before starting my PhD. But again, I was by that point even more equipped with knowledge about OCD because I was studying it for a few years. So again, I'm kind of lucky because SSRIs work for me, which is not the case for a good 40-50% of people with OCD. So again, like I recovered and I'm doing much, much better now. And I'm at Cambridge, yes, doing my PhD funded by Orchard OCD.
Awesome.
And I do my PhD alongside my working with Orchard. And specifically in my PhD, I'm investigating the relationship between traumatic life experiences and the onset and maintenance of OCD, which is quite, I would say, an under-investigated aspect of OCD, which I found quite weird when I found out because about 70 to 79%, the literature says, of people who suffer from OCD actually experiences experiences intrusive images and intrusive thoughts, which are either directly or at least partially associated with a traumatic event, with a traumatic memory. So that's, say, my focus and the expertise I'm developing.
Nice.
And yeah, I'm just in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's an important area of research, absolutely. So it's good you're doing it. Thank you for sharing your story. Obviously, there's a ton more to know about it, but yeah, for another day, maybe. Yeah. So Nick, be good to introduce yourself and then, just share some of your story.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Nick. So I'm the chair and the co-founder of Orchard OCD, which we set up in 2016. My background is in drug development for rare diseases, actually. I've spent the past 25 years developing a drug for my children who have a rare disease called alkaptonuria, which has been very successful, actually. We managed to get the drug approved a few years ago. And I set up Orchard to really kind of try and bring that expertise into kind of OCD. But we don't just do medications, as you can see from the project we're funding with Margherita, looking at psychological interventions, all kinds of things. But my OCD story really started in 1990, at the age of 17. So I was living in France. My parents are French, and I had a very happy childhood, very good friends, very good grades at school, was in a band. My parents were lovely, all that kind of stuff. And it just suddenly came out of nowhere on the bus home from school, just this thought that came in my mind. And my reaction was, oh my God, I really better not have that thought, And obviously, as we know with OCD, well, then I was just monitoring my thoughts all the time. And it just stuck there for years and years and morphed a bit like a hydra. You cut off one head, another three would pop out, the Puro, basically, what we, as people live the experience, call pure OCD. And in 1990, there was no internet, nothing, basically. So I went home pretty terrified, told my parents, who had no idea what was going on, and went through my parents' medical encyclopedia, couldn't find anything. And so got the yellow pages and took myself to see a psychologist, in a few villages down. And I went to see her, and she was utterly useless because she took me through 3 years of Freudian psychoanalysis and Jungian psychoanalysis, going back through parents' generations and grandparents and all that. Never once diagnosed me with OCD. Took my thoughts incredibly seriously. Thought, this must really mean something about you. So it was utterly useless and utterly pointless. I don't know if it made it worse, but it definitely didn't make it better. And so I lived with that for many years, and I only told my parents and I told my girlfriend at the time, and that was it. I was so full of shame and guilt and all that. I told nobody. And then it just came and went, kind of relapsing, remitting. And then it was only in the late 90s when one of my brothers lent me a book about OCD that I read it. And it was mainly about the checking and compulsions OCDs, but it was about obsessions and compulsions. And I thought, I think this is what I've got. So it took about nearly 10 years to get a self-diagnosis. Anyway, then in 2003, when my second son was born, I had a relapse, and I've learned since then that often there is a link, when kids are born, often the mum or the dad or whoever with OCD. That lasted about a year, but then I knew what was wrong. So I took myself to see the GP. He said, look, you'll have to wait a year or two to see a psychologist on the NHS. Found a private CBT practitioner who knew all about OCD, who put me through 1 year of ERP. So mental ERP is really difficult to do, 2 hours a day, mental ERP. But it kind of worked, it kind of worked. It was really difficult, lots of ups and downs. But after the year, the OCD just went away. And it went away for many years. And then it would tend to come back in periods of stress, generally when I was changing job. It always comes and kicks you when you're down. And then had an awful relapse in 2011. And that was the first time I had depression with it. And that was just awful. And then it came and went and stuff. And then a very bad relapse in 2016, which just accelerated at such a fast rate. And that's when I joined a local OCD support group here in Cambridge, which is affiliated to OCD Action. So I went to see them in December 2016 when I was very seriously suicidal and ill and all that kind of stuff. And fortunately, I had a very good GP. Who immediately sent me to see an NHS psychiatrist who immediately prescribed clomipramine because I'd tried a whole bunch of SSRIs before and nothing had worked. So I came back with this prescription of 100 milligrams of clomipramine. And I was like, I really don't want to go through this whole antidepressant thing again with the anxiety. I really can't be bothered. I've just had enough. And a guy at the support group said, Nick, just take your meds. Just take your meds. Clomipramine can work. Take your meds. And it was quite extraordinary because even though clomipramine never did anything for my OCD symptoms, it worked pretty well for the depression. It really did. It didn't cure the depression, but it worked pretty well. And then the other really good thing is I found an extraordinarily good psychologist, a clinical psychologist called Dr. Amanda Burren. I'd seen by then about 10 different psychologists of varying flavors. Some were good, some were less good. She was extraordinary. She seemed to have an understanding of what was going on in my mind that was better than I myself, And I saw her twice a week for a year. And what was extraordinary about her was one, her commitment. Secondly, she brought an arsenal of techniques, not just one technique. So cognitive therapy, schema therapy, eye movement desensitization, imagery rescripting, a whole bunch of things. And and between sessions, I could see she'd really thought about it. And it was just really, it really helped. So that was a very difficult year where I must have relapsed about 30 times and got better and relapsed and all that. And then anyway, so cut a long story short, the past 5 years have actually been very good. There's been very little OCD in the past 5 years. I'm now on 10 milligrams of clomipramine a day. I haven't seen a psychologist in a few years. And I really do think it's been a mixture of a really good support group. I think that's been really important. I now co-facilitate the support group. I've been co-facilitating that for 8 years. A really good support group, an exceptionally good psychologist, and a really good psychiatrist, and also support from the family and stuff, So yeah, it's been a real struggle. And so what happened when I got very ill in 2016 is one of my older brothers said to me, Nick, why don't you try and make some meaning out of this suffering and try and set up an organization that will fund research? Because, research into OCD that there is, as we know, it's accelerated, but it's bottom of the pecking order when it comes to the funders like the MRC, the NIHR and all that. So that's where the idea for Orchard came along. And then also I went to see Professor Veal, when I was very ill, and Nick said, and Professor Veal said the same thing. Nick, why don't you put your efforts? I think that's part of the action and commitment therapy. It's kind of like, try and make meaning out of your suffering. So as I got better, decided to set up Orchard and contacted Professor Feinberg, who was very keen, to kind of work with us, who's been just amazing and stuff. And then I guess that the last thing was I became very good friends with someone in my support group who was incredibly ill with his OCD, and he had a form of OCD called false memory OCD, which I hadn't really come across, which was just utterly devastating. and took his own life 5 years ago. And it was absolutely awful. And that was another thing that really made me think, gosh, there's so many things to deal with, access to treatment, all that kind of stuff, But I thought, with Orchard, we'll just put our efforts into research, understanding the disorder, and trying to develop new and better treatments. And that's what we're doing.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think that's what distinguishes Orchard, maybe my cat, from the other charities. Is you guys really focus on the research side of things. I'm not saying they don't, but one of your sole focuses is the research. And yeah, maybe I'm glad you said it about, finding that meaning in suffering, that when you started the organization, it gave you that focus, that meaning, that drive. And I think also when you do stuff, I found this with the podcast, when you do stuff around OCD, it's harder to forget the things you learn. Whereas I think you go to therapy and then your life has nothing to do with OCD. You may forget. Whereas for me, every week, like you say something or Margherita says something, and that reminds me, I haven't been doing that for months. I need to do that again. Or going to support groups may be another way of keeping that information forefront of mind.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Margherita?
No. I was saying that's so true. I mean, I read about OCD every day, obviously for my PhD, for my job with Nick. And that it helps a lot. I mean, although sometimes, obviously, for me, sometimes it's a little bit triggering, can be a little bit triggering. Like I'm doing a systematic review on this relationship between trauma and OCD. And I was reading about a lot of, traumatic events that I would rather not read about. And that's triggering, but that's also the same thing that keeps me going, even the moments where like I'm most tired, or even when, my OCD kicks in, not as severely as, it did until 1 year ago. But every time I read about OCD, or every time I read about stories of people with OCD, that what really keeps me going, really gives me a lot of motivation. And I live my job and my PhD more as a mission, actually, than a job. Because again, it was for Nick, for me, choosing this career path and this academic path was definitely about giving meaning. Apart, obviously, there is a scientific curiosity there that I've always had since when I was very young. But it's very much about giving meaning to all the sufferance and the pain that's been there for me in the past years. Because when I think about my adolescence, like different from many people who would like to go back and have, and be 18, 19 again, I would never go back, not for a single day, right? But at the same time, kind of sorry about this, because I would love to have a memory of my teenagehood, like a good memory, like, like the thoughtless period of your life. Like for me, it was exactly the opposite. So in a way, everything I'm doing now is giving meaning to all the pain and sufferings that has been there in the past. And yeah, it's also true that working on OCD kind of tends to always remind you what are the most important things to focus on therapy-wise, like little things. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, spot on. I do find like at the weekend I have to shut OCD out, apart from unless my brain decides to give it to me. I shut all the advocacy, being a therapist, all of that doesn't exist to me at the weekend. And then it allows me to come back Monday and be all in on OCD. But I need that break.
Yeah, you need to take a few breaks sometimes. Yeah, for instance, every book I read for pleasure, like before sleeping, for instance, it would all be about OCD, because I wanted to learn as much as possible, both for the PhD, for the job, but also for myself, right? Then I realized, okay, that's fine, but it cannot be, my entire life. So now I also read books about other topics, about other things. But I would never change what I do, even when it comes out to be kind of a little bit triggering sometimes. I would never change what I do for anything else.
Yeah, spot on. And Nick, thank you for sharing your story. And you mentioned at the start about your sons, was it? Not plural?
Yeah. I've got 3 sons. Yeah.
And since I met you, it's been kind of wrecking my brain, because I remember hearing a podcast probably like 7 to 10 years ago with someone very similar story to you. It was for a very rare disease. They went and created their own medical pharmaceutical company to find a treatment. So have you also done podcasts on that before historically?
Yeah, so I didn't actually set up a pharma company. We set up a charity, a patient group 22 years ago called the AKU Society. I don't know if it's the podcast you heard, but it was a podcast where they interviewed me on Nature. There was a Nature podcast in 2019.
Okay.
And then an article in Nature by a guy called David Adam, who you probably know.
Oh, yeah, I know David, yeah.
Yeah. So he actually, when he was at Nature, he interviewed me about alkaptonuria because I'd met him about OCD and all that. But that was, that's been one hell of a journey. And thankfully, it's gone incredibly well. You know, we managed to develop a medication that just works an absolute treat for this rare disease.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah, really inspirational. Just the power of taking action, right? I imagine at the time maybe you felt that you wouldn't be able to make a difference, but you just wanted to try, or did you think you could make a difference?
What, for the rare disease?
Yeah.
Gosh, well, so the boys were diagnosed at birth. So in the year 2000, when our first son was born, because his nappies were going red-black, you know, and we didn't know what it was. And the first diagnosis from the doctor was that my wife had eaten too much red cabbage, you know, and that's got breast milk and all that. Yeah. Eventually, we got a diagnosis of this rare disease, alkaptonuria, which is super rare, 1 person in 500,000. And I remember the doctors at Great Ormond Street saying, well, there's really nothing you can do about it, you know. And I remember going home with my wife and we thought, well, that doesn't sound right, you know. And then, you know, early days of the internet, met a patient who was setting up a patient group, and then met this amazing doctor called Professor Ranganath, who I just spoke to actually again earlier today. And then, it all started there, really. And I knew nothing about medical research or anything. Had I known how difficult it is to develop a drug through preclinical, clinical trials, to get regulatory approval, all that kind of stuff, had I known how expensive it is, how long it takes and everything, I don't know, I'd have probably still given it a go, but I was very naive. But thankfully, I was with people who knew how to do it, you know. And so that was the beginning of a 25-year journey.
Wow, amazing. Well, good for you. And I think sometimes that naivety can serve us.
Yes.
Like when I did a marathon, I didn't appreciate how hard it would be. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. Not to compare the two, but
no. Yeah. I think you need a certain amount of naivety, but you also need to surround yourself with people who know how it's done, but who are positive about it.
Yeah.
You know, who aren't scared about the hurdles. You know, that's the key thing.
Yeah, and I don't like that the doctor said, but there's nothing that can be done or that you can do. But I like the fact that you didn't agree with that and said, well, actually, I'll show you.
Yeah, it took a while, but we just thought, well, that's and actually in the rare disease space, you know, because there's like 6,000 or 7,000 rare diseases and all that, and there's loads of little patient groups like ours, you know, who've come to similar conclusions. You know, doctors have said, sorry, you know, nothing we can do, and they're just like, well, wait a second, I don't accept that. So they try and do something about it, you know.
Yeah, which is how change occurs, right? Hence, you've now got a medication that works really well. Awesome.
You know, Stuart,
go for it.
Interrupt you, but I thought it was worth mentioning that Nick also landed on an Italian journal. I found Nick on an Italian journal because they were celebrating his success in developing basically the only drug, I think, Nick, for AKU. And it was very funny because I had just started working with him, and I was on I think I was watching actually one of his TED Talks, and there was some link basically to this Italian journal with celebrating Nick's journey for his sons. So really very inspirational.
Yeah, that is awesome. And I guess a good man to have in the OCD space. So no pressure, Nick, but it'd be good to have a medication that works really well all the time. So maybe we go there now. So the organization, maybe in more detail, you know, what you guys do and what you have been doing and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, we're a tiny charity. You know, we have, a board, 4 or 5 of us. We've got a few starting, a few new trustees, hopefully who'll be starting at some point soon.
Sure.
And then 2 members of staff, there's Margherita and Anna Maria. But yeah, the whole focus is, as we said earlier, really research. So understanding the disorder and kind of helping develop new treatments. And really our approach is, we're very much agnostic. We're whether it's psychological therapy, medication, neuromodulation, whatever. For us, what's important is that we can build evidence, that they become evidence-based, and that they're effective, So what we've done so far, we've funded a number of studies. The first one, which is probably the most well-known, is the study of psilocybin, which Professor Nutt and Professor Feinberg led. At Imperial College, which has gone really well, and that will be published soon. So Professor Feinberg presented the results at the ECNP, which is the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology in Milan, and that's gone for publication. And we're now trying to raise funds to do a bigger study, basically, on that. And obviously there's a lot of excitement around, psychedelics and this, that, and the other and stuff. The other study that we co-funded was a study of neuromodulation, so transcranial direct current stimulation, which was published in Comprehensive Psychiatry, which showed an effect, actually, quite rapid, which was good, And so again, we're working to do a much larger study. The third one is a study at the University of Chicago under an absolutely amazing psychiatrist and scientist called Professor John Grant. Who's just a really amazing guy. And he's been studying a drug called tolcapone, which is an old Parkinson's drug, And tolcapone has brain penetrance and affects dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. And what he showed in a 2-week study is that it led to a reduction in OCD symptoms over 2 weeks, compared to placebo, because it seems to help with cognitive flexibility. So his patients were saying, oh my God, suddenly I don't feel I do have to engage with these compulsions and all that kind of stuff. So we are funding him to do an 8-week study, and the results of that will come out later this year, And then obviously there's a Margherita study, which I just find, really important. I think the whole area of trauma and OCD, as Margherita said, is massively under-researched. It comes up all the time in my support group. And Margherita is going to be looking at psychological interventions to deal with that, some of which sound really exciting, So as far as we're concerned, we will try and help and support, anybody who is serious, trying to gather evidence about something that can help, But also we're trying to kind of build the wider ecosystem to make it easier for researchers and scientists to do their research and to raise funds. And one of the things we realized when speaking to scientists was twofold. One is that when they were doing funding applications, funders, say the MRC or whatever, or the European Union, would ask them, well, what's the economic impact of OCD? What are we talking about here? Because, for these people, the economic impact is important. I mean, from my point of view, what's more important is actually the human impact, but for them, it's all about money. So what we did, we worked with a group in Cambridge called Costello Medical, who are an absolutely amazing company. They have a pro bono department, and they did some work with us and with Professor Feinberg to look at the economic cost of OCD in the UK. And that was published in Comprehensive Psychiatry again. And the cost rises to around more than 10 billion a year, 10 billion.
UK only, right?
UK only. I mean, that's like obviously NHS costs, but then also private therapy, but then also, people unemployment, losing their jobs, presenteeism at work where you're consumed with OCD, but you're still turning up, but you're not, and then it's just, really a costly thing. So that's useful. And people are telling us that's really helping with their funding applications and stuff. And then the second thing also, they told us, look, we're struggling to recruit people to our studies, whether that's a questionnaire study or an MRI study or a new drug study or a psychological study. So then we set up a registry, which we launched a couple of years ago. We have several hundred patients on there. And then basically people with lived experience can log onto the registry. They can say a little bit about, their OCD, their meds, and then what kind of studies they're interested in. And we have, I think, around 15 studies on there, only studies with ethics approval. Okay. They're put on there, and then we match the people with lived experience to the actual studies, and that the whole idea is just to accelerate the research, to help people recruit, but also I think we're giving people with OCD a means of making sense of their suffering by helping us understand and treat the disorder better. Those are the kind of key things that we're working on. And now the registry, we're looking at making it go international, all that kind of stuff, really.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. And with the study that showed the 10 billion cost to the UK, did that factor in things as well? Like, let's say I'm not a caregiver, just I'm married to someone with OCD, and now I keep having to take days off work and stuff like that. Let's say, did it factor those more even wider costs in as well? As like,
I can't remember, Margherita. Can you remember?
Yeah. Yes, it did. It did.
Cool.
Like caregivers also often, had to go part-time, for instance, like from full-time jobs to part-time jobs, or like hitting the jobs all together to take care of the person that was bedbound sometimes with OCD, those costs were defined indirect costs. Also, depression was defined, as I remember, as an indirect cost in the paper, because depression is often, in people with OCD, depression is often a reactive diagnosis. I mean, like a reaction to the OCD, right? As the OCD improves, the depression usually improves, or depending on the medication someone's on, the depression can improve, the OCD maybe improves less, but usually in people with OCD and comorbid depression, the depression is the secondary diagnosis. That's why it was, considered an indirect cost. And depression also is extremely costly to society. It's costly even if we only consider people without the OCD. If we add the people with the OCD, whose OCD is actually causing the depression, it becomes even more costly. So yeah. All those indirect costs have been taken into account, because obviously they are.
Yeah.
I guess just a couple of things really, just to finish off on that, Stuart. One is we've had quite a wealthy individual who's been supporting us over the years really generously. And what really convinced him was when I explained to him that, first of all, how serious OCD is, because originally, people kind of think it's about lining up your pencils and color coding your spreadsheets and stuff. So that was a real realization. And then also explaining to him that we need an arsenal, really, to be able to treat OCD. And I see that in my support group. Some people it's an SSRI, some people it's another SSRI, some people it's an antipsychotic on top. A lot of people it's CBT or ERP and all that kind of stuff, and one thing works for one person, but not for the other. So really, we need as many interventions as possible, for people. And then ultimately we need to help people access them, which is the real big challenge. And that's, I think, the most frustrating thing I see in my support group is that existing therapies do work, not for everybody. And that's why we're doing more research and stuff, but they do work, and people just really struggle to get access to them, and that's very frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, well, a big one on that, on my own private clinic I co-founded, because psychotherapists are not VAT exempt. So we hit the VAT threshold, which obviously meant we were serving a lot of people, but then that meant suddenly our rates had to go up by 20% overnight. Our therapists don't get paid more, the centre doesn't get paid more, the government gets paid more. And all we're doing is collecting money on the government's behalf. That's great if you're a builder and you can buy loads of materials and claim money back, but we don't make any money back. But it's frustrating. We campaigned really hard trying to avoid VAT and all of this. Our psychologists that work for us are VAT exempt. Yeah. So we don't charge 20%. They're doing exactly the same work as our psychotherapists, but we have to charge 20%. So, and we kept our costs as low as possible as we already could. So it broke our heart that we had to increase, the money, and no one's better off other than HMRC, and they're going to spend that poorly anyway. So no one's really better off. So that's a big contentious issue as well. So I guess I'm just bringing that up of access, that just lowers access. And then also there are some people on the NHS waitlist that could afford private therapy if it was a bit cheaper. Yeah. So obviously if we removed that would lower the NHS waitlist and allow people that 100% couldn't afford it to get therapy quicker. But the government are just...
Well, the VAT issue is very difficult. I mean, charities don't get VAT back.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Yeah, if you
it's awful. It's just like, I know. I mean, that's No, I think you're absolutely right. But I just see people, in my support group, waiting 2 years to see a psychotherapist on the NHS. Yeah, and then by then their situation's got so bad. Yeah, it's. But I guess that's more kind of a systemic thing, isn't it? Really, that needs to be really resolved at kind of very high level.
Yeah. Well, I'm working with the BACP, and I think the UKCP are also involved. I'm sure the BABCP too are doing it, but definitely the BACP, they're campaigning continuously with the Conservatives and now the Labour government. But you know how slow government moves. It just makes zero sense. So, but yeah.
And it could have
common sense isn't that common in Parliament. Yeah. So I can tell it's really annoyed me, this issue. But and anyway. Yeah. So okay. And I know the US then is what, like 50, 60, 70 billion cost to them. If we look at the population size, and it's through the roof, absolutely. And you guys can, people can go to Orchard and register, right?
Yes.
Just talk a bit more about that.
I can't remember what the website is. Is it orchardregistry.org?
Yeah. It's orchardocdregistry.org. And they would basically find the button there that they just need to click, and they will basically the next page would be this form. Well, they just, as Nick was mentioning earlier, they would just need to input a few details about their OCD, the medication they're on, if they're on any medication, psychotherapy they had in the past, if they had ERP, CBT, what kind of psychotherapy, when the OCD onset first, this kind of information basically, and then indicating which kind of studies they're more interested in to taking part. And that's it really. And then they would receive one e-news every month with all the new studies, all the studies that are open for them. And what we try to do is really matching patients and studies. So patients with certain characteristics that would benefit more from certain studies, that are more interested in certain studies, they would receive more notifications about those specific studies than others. So that basically we kind of sort of funnel it to fine tune it as much as we can. And it's working pretty well. Actually, I was talking with my PhD supervisor this morning, Professor Emmy Milton, and she had to recruit people with OCD and people with PTSD in 2 different occasions to do 2 different focus groups to sort of better design the study we are going to do in the future, because they must be informed by people with lived experience. She was telling me, I was shocked by the difference in pace in recruiting the people with PTSD, because there's no such registry for people with PTSD. Different pace in recruiting people with PTSD for the focus group and recruiting people with OCD for the focus group, because all the people for OCD have been recruited to the Orchard OCD registry, and it said it was at least 10 times faster. She repeated to me this morning after like 3 months from the focus groups. And also we've been receiving feedback from other researchers from other universities whose research has benefited so much from the registry, basically just because their recruitment was so much faster compared to the average, thanks to the registry. So it's really working wonders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you've highlighted there, finding participants is the hardest, probably one of the hardest things in research, right?
It is. And for sure, it's the one that slows you down the most.
Yes.
Probably together with how long the ethics committees take to approve your study. That's another part of research. Critical. But yeah, definitely the participant recruitment is the most challenging.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad you guys are figuring that one out. Anything else on Orchard OCD you want to talk about?
I guess it's more just congratulate you, Stuart, on what you're doing, because I've become convinced that the single biggest barrier really that we're facing as a community, as people with OCD and all that kind of stuff, is this misperception that is so...
Sorry, cat's attacking me.
But it's this misperception around OCD. And it's not just in the UK, it's in most countries, we go to. The fact that people really do think it's just about color coding your spreadsheets and lining up your pencil really seems to permeate the whole of society. So I think at the political level, but also within the medical sphere, within the pharma industry and all that. So last week, Professor Sharon Morin from Anglia Ruskin did a really good inaugural lecture on hoarding disorder, which was just fascinating. And after that, we were speaking to a psychiatrist who's an expert on OCD and all that, and he was saying how even amongst the psychiatric community, people just have very little understanding of just how serious OCD can be. So I really do think that the podcast you're doing, Stuart, is absolutely crucial, getting the message out there that this is a serious disorder. It is probably the most important thing we can do, both to improve access for people and secondly, to get more research done and new treatments,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that was one of my motivations for the podcast, right? If people can't get access, then at least I can hopefully put good information out there free of charge that they can use. And yeah, no, so it's I'm glad to still be doing it 10 years on.
It takes commitment, and it's really good. Well done. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, I appreciate it.
I echo everything Nick said. It's really, you're really doing a wonderful job. And also, yeah, as Nick mentioned, like there's just too little awareness out there, right? Even among psychiatrists and the pharma industries. I was actually kind of shocked by what Jeremy, actually, the psychiatrist we were mentioning, told us about one of his colleagues. Actually, don't know who actually, but basically there are psychiatrists out there when patients with OCD, especially with pedophilia OCD, with the theme of pedophilia, go and tell them what their obsessions are about because they're desperate, they cannot keep them for themselves anymore. I mean, there are some psychiatrists and GPs that go and report them to the police, which obviously makes the condition even worse. Like, how is that even possible among GPs, but let alone among psychiatrists? That really shocked me because that really makes you understand how much ignorance there is about the condition. And this is also what's, preventing a lot of funding from coming in through, our way to fund research. Because obviously the more awareness and proper knowledge is out there, and the more people will understand how important it is to fund scientific research into OCD new treatments, but also to better understand the condition. So I'm talking about etiology of the condition as well, because obviously it's all related. The more we understand the etiology of the condition, and the better we can design interventional studies, right? So really, I think the more we talk about it, and the more we fight against this ignorance about the condition that's still out there in 2025. Yeah, 2025. It's well, hopefully it is changing. Maybe not as quick as we'd like, but like actually straight after this, I'm doing a 3-hour training for therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists who don't work with OCD. So it's a 3-hour training just to give them the basics on not how to work with OCD, but if you have someone come in your room that has OCD, how to identify it. Also, not overreact if they share an intrusive thought that's scary or weird or something like that, because there's not really been much like that out there.
That's great.
So hopefully it makes a difference. And where was I going with that? Yeah. So, last question on the organization. You said you had a big funder. How else do you guys fund it? And is there any way the listeners, if they want to support, they can?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually just hired a fundraiser to really get things going because, we've had funding from a few high net worth individuals, a few trusts and foundations, a few companies, but as well as individuals, who have OCD themselves. We've never actually gone out much to fundraise from the community and stuff. But every time we do an event, like when we did the one in November, we didn't ask for any money or anything. But at the end, people are like, oh, I really want to donate. I'd love to donate and stuff. And so we started thinking about it, like, if, people who lived experience of OCD and their families just gave, a couple of pounds a month or whatever, all together collectively, that could make a lot of money. And, the majority of it really goes into research and clinical studies and all that kind of stuff. So all this to answer your question, There's if they go onto the orchardocd.org website, there's a donate button there, and that donate button then allows people to donate. And honestly, any amount is very welcome.
Yeah, so it makes a huge difference. Like imagine, Stuart, there are about 1 million people with OCD only in the UK. If each one of these people would only donate £1, it would be £1 million in no time. Like imagine this. Obviously, this is like utopia. It's actually something very, very possible in physics. £1 is like a quarter of a coffee here in the UK. Yeah. In Italy, you get one coffee with one. No longer actually. You need at least €2. But anyway, it's really nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, imagine the difference. Like the collective can really does. It's huge.
Yeah. That absolutely, yeah. It all adds up, and we can all make a difference. And on that, actually, thinking of fundraising for you guys, with your event was awesome, like I said, and I mean that. But it was free, right? From memory, it was completely free. So I think what I'd like to see you guys do is just pay what you can, with a caveat of, if you can't pay anything, that's absolutely fine. Book a ticket. But there's people like me that might be like, okay, I'll pay £20, £30, whatever it is, because there's no reason why you guys, because then all that money covers the event, and then there's more money for research. And
absolutely, that's definitely.
You're so right. You know why it was free? Because the reasoning behind it was, many people with OCD, especially those with severe OCD or moderate OCD, can't work, or their caregivers they have to give up jobs for their the person with OCD and everything. So yeah, we were thinking we don't want to prevent anyone from coming because of money, but actually we could put the choice, because actually there are people
free and pay what you can, or free or pay what you can.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or pay what you want is a better one, because then it's
yeah. No, definitely we're going down that road.
Good. Cool. All right. I'll pay £1. I'm joking. I'll do more. So lastly, you both got a billboard where you live. What do you want written on that billboard?
Gosh.
I would want OCD is not about lining up your pencils. It's not about color coding your spreadsheets. It can be a devastating mental disorder, And then obviously, the billboard would have so much text, because I'm going to describe it and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think I'd start with that.
Cool. Nice.
I think that by that time, my biggest wish would be we found a cure for OCD. And I think really my biggest dream is to be able one day to say, I contributed to find this cure. And I would like that on the billboard.
I like that. Yeah, awesome. Good billboards. And you can use that event money to pay for them. So I guess, lastly, just anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
I guess, what we often discuss in my support group is there is hope, there really is, and I've seen that both myself and all that, but there is hope. There are treatments out there in existence that do work, and what I have found is for people to get better, it really is just about really persevering through the darkest times, and just trying to find that psychologist, that psychiatrist, that support group, whatever, who can really help you, and then new treatments being developed, so there really is a message of hope, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nick. Like perseverance through the darkest times, I think, is probably the most important, because obviously those are the moments where it's easier to, just give up. Like very sadly, giving up an OCD often means, becoming suicidal or even committing suicide. There's really, really a lot of hope. Like I've been in those darkest places many times in the past. Still today, I'm here. Like I was actually deprived of my productivity, like completely, due to the OCD, and now I manage a PhD and a job at the same time. Which was just unthinkable when I was very ill with OCD. So what seems, just unthinkable and impossible when you are in those darkest places is actually possible, even if you, can't see in those moments. But it's possible. So there's no reason to give up.
Yeah, exactly. The sun always rises without being too cheesy. Doesn't want to be dark forever. Yeah. Unless you're in like the Northern Hemisphere where it's dark for about 4 months of the year. But even then the sun does come up at some point. So thank you so much both for your time and sharing the work you guys do and your stories. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.